Let's talk about the Georgia Bulldogs. You know, I don't use language like repeat. I do use repeat. I don't use defending, though. That's true. I don't use defending national champion because the fact of the matter is nobody can take last year's national championship from Georgia. Doesn't matter. Short of the NCAA coming down, and on this show, we don't even acknowledge when they do take national championships. Nobody can take that. They're not defending anything tomorrow night. But what they do have is a very formidable opponent. What has to happen for Georgia to win this game tomorrow night? Well, some of you may think, well, if they show up, if the bus doesn't break down, they'll be okay. I would caution you that I don't really think you get this late into the season and have an easy road. Sometimes games are blowouts, and you'll talk to coaches sometimes, and they'll say, hey, I know we won the game by 30. That was not an easy game. Conversely, you'll talk to them sometimes, they won by 13, and they'll tell you, we really never doubted during the game. It's just the way it played out. For instance, Georgia-Tennessee this year. Game played out the way it did. It's not a massive margin of victory. Game was never in doubt. How does this game have to play out? I'm thinking about three phases, okay? Everyone's going to talk about Stetson Bennett, or everyone's going to talk about Georgia's corners, or everyone's going to talk about how many non-offensive points TCU can score. Well, how about this? What if I guaranteed you, in padlock stat fashion, Georgia displays B- or better football in all three phases? If you guaranteed me that on this Sunday evening here in Inglewood, California, I would tell you that Monday evening, you're going to see red and black confetti raining down in that building behind us. B- or better. They don't have to thread the needle like TCU does. So essentially, what I'm saying to you is avoid disaster. Here's the follow-up to that, though. You can't play not to lose. You can't play conservatively. You got to let your horses run. It's been a familiar theme on the show all week. We've talked like that all week. So it's not that you just play not to lose. It's not that. But, man, if you just play B- or better football, nothing has happened so catastrophic as to allow TCU to beat you unless they just take the game from you. Okay, and I believe this spread is as fat as it is accurately and for a reason, so I don't think a heads-up game favors TCU. They have to have some things go really specially right for them. Another key for Georgia, two words, protect and strike. Talked earlier this week about pressure rate. Georgia is 7th in the country in pressure rate allowed. TCU is 100th in the country defensively in pressure rate against opposing quarterbacks. Sometimes you have anomalies statistically. Sometimes there's just a game where this stuff right here and what you see on the field don't really match up. We just saw that, for the record, when TCU played Michigan. Crazy things have happened. What I am telling you, though, is I think it would be a big mistake for Kirby Smart, Todd Monken to look at this and say, you know what, we got a size advantage, we got a physicality advantage, let's just lean on them. Michigan was foolish enough to think that. It didn't work. And I'm not saying it wouldn't work for Georgia. I'm just saying if you're trying to put your guys in the best position to win, that's not necessarily the best way to go about this tomorrow night. Also, keep in mind, I've heard a lot of folks talking about how Georgia's receiving profile looks like this. Georgia's statistical profile looks like that. Georgia doesn't have the same team now they did in October, guys. It's very fruitless, I think, at this point, to be pulling up passing statistics and thinking that you're gauging what you're getting from Georgia Monday night because of what this piece of paper says. A.D. Mitchell is not on that list. He's going to be on the field Monday night. He was on the field against Ohio State. Arian Smith, not going to be anywhere on that list for the most part. He was on the field against Ohio State. Both those guys found the end zone. So when you pair him with guys like Brock Bowers, and then you throw in that pressure allowed versus pressure forced statistical mismatch, you got to pounce on it. You can't sit back. You got to go take the game. The third thing is I am not a believer that you're going to shut down Quentin Johnson, or if you do so, you do it at the expense of leaving other guys open. I don't think Georgia has to shut down Quentin Johnson. What I do think it would greatly behoove them to do is, tackle. There's a lot of talk. Any coach that I talked to this week, they didn't question Georgia's defensive makeup. They didn't question scheme. They didn't question anything like that. They did talk about the difference in pass defense, just as a holistic statistic, which rhymes, by the way. But they talked about how if you can ISO Georgia's corners in man coverage, make them play the ball in the air, make them defend a guy, that's probably where they're most susceptible. Ohio State found that out, or at least put that on display last week. Tennessee did not find a way to do that earlier this year. They're going to get theirs. Okay, TCU is going to throw the ball on you enough tomorrow night where inevitably guys are going to catch some passes. What do you do afterwards? Because it's the yards after catch and the explosive play rate for TCU that I'm going to talk more about in just a second that'll ultimately be one of the biggest keys to this game. You may look at that final score from TCU last week and you may think, it must have been an explosive play fest. Well, it really wasn't. Now, those of you who watched the game, you understand how it played out. It's okay if they catch a few balls. Just don't let them break off 30 extra yards afterwards. Against Georgia, we've seen all year, as some of these teams, especially when they get in these postseason settings, you're more likely to score on them from midfield, especially if their red zone defense is as good as Georgia's is. You're more likely to score via explosive play between the 40s than you are inside the 20s, which makes no sense. I'm not asking you to make it make mathematical sense. I'm just telling you that's the way it plays out sometimes from a stat profile perspective. The last thing that Georgia's going to have to do, and this is normally what you would say to the underdog team, but I'm not going to say it to TCU. Georgia's got to weather the storm. It's very foolish to think that team's going to roll over. That TCU team's not rolling over. It's way too late in the season to be facing someone who's going to posture themselves like that for you. And here's the other thing. One team rolls in knowing they're better than the other one. Let's just call it like it is. One team understands they've got to use tactics that probably they didn't feel like they had to use against Kansas State. They didn't feel like they necessarily had to pull out of the bag against Texas Tech. It's all got to be on the table. Essentially, the same approach you saw versus Michigan has to be on the table with the volume turned up maybe to 11. See that catch, Greg? Turned up to 11 against Georgia. Be that as it may, that means you probably have a little storm to weather. There's nothing more aggravating in sports or in life than when you think you are superior to someone and they just start clipping you. They start nipping at you. It's very aggravating. It's very aggravating, for example, if you've got an offensive line that outweighs the defensive front they're facing by 20 or 30 pounds on average, but their quickness just keeps getting to you and you're not able to open holes. You saw Michigan. You think Michigan wasn't aggravated last week? And then when they start giving up points, that's the storm. You have to weather that storm. Yeah, eventually, your recruiting, your skill, your coaching staff, you got to count on it to take over. That doesn't mean it takes over in the first quarter. They don't play these things in 15-minute increments. They do them in 60 minutes because that's how long a football game has to be. Sometimes it takes like 50 or 55 of those 60 minutes for it to finally wear on your opponent. So weathering the storm, another big key for Georgia.
Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.